a sleeping woman, a dangerous man, and the one rooftop in Chicago where neither of them was supposed to be. She was just a waitress trying to survive another shift. He was the most feared name in the city's underground, a man who hadn't felt anything in years. When Raphael Vance stepped onto the roof of Kingsley Tower at 1:53 in the morning and found Marin Cole sleeping in the cold, he had every reason to walk away. He stayed, and that single decision was about to unravel both of their lives. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now, and drop a comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now sit back, because this one is going to take everything you've got. The elevator opened onto the 40th floor at 1:47 in the morning, and the hallway beyond it was dark except for the maintenance lighting running along the baseboard, thin amber strips that turned the carpet the color of old blood. Marin Cole stepped off alone. She had a mop bucket with a broken wheel that dragged left, a canvas tote with her second pair of shoes, and a keyring with 14 keys on it, most of which opened doors she no longer needed to open tonight. She'd already cleaned the main lounge, the private dining room, both bathrooms, and the glass corridor that connected the elevator bank to the bar. What was left was the rooftop terrace, and after that she could go home. Home was a one-bedroom apartment in Pilsen with a radiator that knocked all winter and a landlord who knocked on the first of every month like clockwork. She had 40 minutes to finish the rooftop before the last southbound train. If she missed it, she'd have to wait 45 minutes for the overnight bus, which meant she wouldn't sleep until after 3 and would be back on her feet at 8 for her second job. A breakfast counter in Bridgeport that smelled like grease and burnt coffee and paid $11 an hour plus whatever tips people left when they were half asleep and annoyed at the world. She pushed through the rooftop door with her shoulder. The cold hit her before anything else. Late October in Chicago meant the wind came off the lake with a particular cruelty, a kind of cold that didn't just settle on your skin but burrowed under it, into the joints, into the back of your jaw. She pulled her collar up and looked out at the terrace. A dozen tables still set from the private event that had wrapped at midnight, folded napkins, half-burned votives, 3 empty champagne bottles someone hadn't bothered to collect. She dragged the mop bucket to the service station near the bar, then started stacking chairs. She had done this so many times that she didn't need to think. Her hands knew the angles. Her back knew when to pivot. She stacked 6 chairs, 8, 12, moved to the next table, kept going. The wind pushed at her. The city below was a soft orange blur of streetlights and office windows, and red brake lights strung along Lakeshore Drive, like something almost beautiful if you weren't too tired to look at it properly. She was too tired to look at it properly. By the second table, she found someone had left a lipstick-stained champagne flute wedged between the railing posts, nearly hanging over the edge. She pulled it free carefully, held it up. Still half full. She thought about what it cost, champagne like this. She thought about it for about half a second and then set it in the collection tray and kept working. By the time she got through the 4th table, her feet were broadcasting a specific and articulate pain from the ball of the right foot that had been building since hour 6 of her shift. 14 hours on that floor. She hadn't sat down since the 20-minute break she took in the staff corridor at 5:15 in the afternoon, sitting on an overturned milk crate with her shoes off, eating a granola bar that tasted like cardboard and honey. She finished the last table, began wiping down the bar surface, moved to the low sectional lounge area near the south railing, the nice seating, the expensive chairs with the deep cushions that the event planner always set up when the client was spending serious money. She should stack those too, but her supervisor was gone for the night. The security cameras on this floor had been on loop since the elevator renovation last month, and the maintenance log didn't require the lounge chairs to be stacked, only the dining chairs. She sat down. Just for a minute, she told herself. The cushion took her weight like it was made for it. The wind was still cold, but from this angle, down low against the railing, it passed mostly over her head. The city hummed below, a sound she never heard clearly from street level. Up here, it was continuous, low, almost like water. She pulled the key ring out of her pocket and held it loosely in her fingers. She was asleep in 4 minutes. She didn't know it. You never do. Man. Raphael Vance arrived on the 40th floor at 1:53 a.m. through the private elevator that opened directly onto the terrace without passing through the hallway. He had the only key to that elevator. His head of security, a man named Decker, who he had trusted for 11 years, waited in the lobby with strict instructions to hold any calls. Raphael came here when he needed to think, which was different from what most people meant when they said they needed to think. He wasn't weighing options. He wasn't planning. He wasn't reviewing the numbers that 3 of his operations directors had placed on his desk before 6 o'clock this evening, numbers that should have pleased him, and instead left him sitting in his car in the parking structure for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel. He came here to exist without being Raphael Vance for a few minutes. Just a man standing on a rooftop in the dark. Just a man watching a city that didn't need anything from him right now. He stepped through the elevator doors and stopped. The chairs were stacked. The tables were wiped. The champagne bottles were gone. The cleaning crew had been through, which meant the terrace should have been empty. It was supposed to be empty. That was the arrangement. By 1:30, the floor was clear, and after that it belonged to nobody except Raphael Vance and the wind. But it wasn't empty. He spotted her from 20 feet away. She was tucked into the corner of the low sectional near the south railing, curled slightly sideways in the wide chair, one hand under her cheek and the other open in her lap with a ring of keys slowly slipping toward the cushion edge. Her hair had come loose from whatever she'd pinned it up in. She was wearing the Kingsley staff uniform, black trousers, dark button-down with the KT monogram above the pocket, and her shoes were the kind of sensible flats that meant someone stood in them for a living. She was completely, profoundly asleep. His first instinct was to have someone wake her. His second instinct, arriving immediately after, was to call down to Decker and find out why his rooftop wasn't cleared on schedule. His third instinct surprised him. He walked to the east end of the terrace instead, sat down in one of the dining chairs he'd left against the railing, and let her sleep. He didn't examine the impulse. Raphael Vance had long since stopped trying to examine his impulses toward mercy because they came so rarely that examining them felt like pressing on a bruise. He just sat and looked out at the lake, a flat black absence in the distance, and listened to the wind. He stayed for almost an hour. Mets. Marin came awake all at once the way she always did. No gradual fog, just 0 to full consciousness with a jolt of adrenaline that informed her immediately that she was not in her apartment. The keys were in her lap. Her neck ached. The sky above her was dark and enormous, and she was 40 floors up on the roof of a building she was supposed to have already left. She grabbed the keys, pushed herself upright, and then saw him. He was sitting 15 feet away in a dining chair he'd clearly pulled to the railing, his jacket folded over the back, his sleeves rolled. He had a glass of something in his right hand. She hadn't noticed the bar cart near the elevator doors. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the city. She recognized him. You worked in this building long enough. You knew the faces that mattered. She'd seen Raphael Vance exactly twice before. Once in the lobby when he arrived for a quarterly meeting with his board, surrounded by men in good coats who rearranged themselves every time he changed direction. Once in the elevator, briefly, when the doors opened and he was already inside, and she'd had to decide in half a second whether to step in or wait. And she'd stepped in because she was already late, and she spent the entire ride up staring at the floor indicator. He had not spoken to her on either occasion. She had not expected him to. She stood up now and tried to calculate how bad this was. I fell asleep, she said. I'm sorry. I'll go. He didn't turn his head. How long have you been here? It wasn't exactly a question. She checked her phone. The battery had died while she slept. I don't know, she said honestly. I sat down after I finished cleaning and I didn't mean to. The last train, she stopped herself. He didn't need the explanation. He owned the building. The train schedule was not his problem. Sit down, he said. I should go. The overnight bus runs every 45 minutes from Michigan and Wacker. You've missed at least 2 by now. He still hadn't looked at her. Sit down. She didn't sit down immediately. She stood with her keys in her hand and her coat over her arm and looked at the back of his head and tried to determine whether the instruction was a threat or just a statement. He seemed entirely indifferent to whether she complied or not. That was somehow more unnerving than if he'd been angry. She sat on the edge of the low sectional. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The city was still doing its 2 a.m. thing below them, that low ambient hum. A siren rose and faded somewhere to the south. "You work for Dorian," he said. "I work for Kingsley Tower. Dorian manages the lounge schedule." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. He was still watching the lake. "I work the lounge floor 4 nights a week," she said, "and Sunday brunch when they need coverage." 4 nights plus brunch. He raised the glass, drank, set it down on the railing. "You're the last one out every night. Someone has to close. You volunteer for it." She didn't answer that because it wasn't a question, and the honest answer was complicated. She volunteered for it because closing shift paid a small differential, and because it meant she could start her second job early enough on mornings when the breakfast counter needed her before 8, and because at the end of closing she was always alone in the building, and being alone in the building was the only period of the whole day when nobody needed anything from her. "The chairs in Section 3, he said. "They're supposed to stay stacked at the west wall after events." "I know." She didn't elaborate. "But the ones by the south rail are where you always end up." She looked at him. "You've been watching me clean." "I watch everything in this building." He picked up the glass again. "It's mine." That should have felt threatening. It didn't, quite. It felt like something else. Like a man who was used to owning things and found less comfort in it than people assumed. She couldn't have explained where that reading came from. It was just there. Something in the flatness of the way he said it. "You should have woken me up," she said, "when you came in. You were tired. That's not your problem." He turned and looked at her for the first time. He had a harder face than she remembered from the lobby, or maybe the lobby lighting was designed to smooth things out. In the open air and the low ambient glow of the city, he looked like a man who had spent a significant portion of his life in the presence of things he couldn't afford to flinch at. There were lines around his eyes that weren't from smiling. "You've been working since noon," he said. She didn't ask how he knew that. She suspected he'd been on the roof for longer than she'd realized, and that between that and whatever his security apparatus tracked inside the building, it wasn't difficult information to obtain. 11:30, she said. "That's 14 hours. "I'm aware." "And tomorrow." 8 o'clock breakfast counter in Bridgeport, she said, because at this point it didn't seem worth managing what he knew. "Then back here at 4. He looked at her for another moment and then turned back to the lake. He said nothing. He didn't offer sympathy or commentary or the particular expression people made when they wanted her to understand that they understood how hard her life was. She was exhausted past the point of being grateful for that, but somewhere underneath the exhaustion, she was. The next week, Dorian Slade called a staff meeting. This was unusual. Dorian only called staff meetings when he had a grievance he wanted to distribute across the whole floor, or when corporate sent down a directive he wanted to take credit for rolling out. He was the kind of manager who wore his authority like a coat that was one size too big, always adjusting it, always checking whether it still looked right in the mirror. He stood at the front of the lounge with his hands clasped behind his back and told them that due to new administrative processing fees, tip payouts would be delayed 2 weeks and would be subject to a small processing deduction of 8% per pay period going forward. Marin was standing near the service station. She had calculated what 8% of her average tip payout meant before he finished the sentence. She had been standing on her feet for 4 hours already. "That's not legal," she said. Dorian looked at her with the expression of a man who had been waiting for someone to say something and had pre-selected Marin Cole as the person he most wanted it to come from. "I'm sorry?" Gratuities paid through the point-of-sale system are still wages under Illinois law. You can't take a deduction without written consent from each employee and approval from payroll compliance. The other staff were very still. Dorian smiled in the way of a man who believed the smile made him look patient. "Marin, thank you for that. HR has reviewed this." "Then HR is wrong." She kept her voice level. She was aware that her hands were slightly cold and that her pulse had a particular quality to it that meant she was angry in a way she didn't intend to perform. "I'll be filing a question with the State Labor Board this week. I'd encourage everyone here to keep records of the discrepancy." She picked up her tray and went back to the floor. Dorian said nothing else during the meeting, but after the rest of the staff filtered out, he caught her near the coat check and told her quietly that closing shifts might need to be reassigned going forward, that scheduling was subject to change, that staff who created administrative difficulty sometimes found their hours reflecting that difficulty. She looked at him and said, "Okay?" She went home that night and she did not cry. She had done her crying about things like this a long time ago, and she had gotten a finite amount of it, and she did not waste what was left. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table with her phone and pulled up the Illinois Department of Labor complaint portal and began filling in the form. She had gotten halfway through when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, a time, a location, the rooftop. She stared at the message for a long time. She had not given Raphael Vance her number. She had not, to her knowledge, given anyone at Kingsley Tower her personal cell number except HR when she was hired, and HR kept files she had never authorized to be shared. She went anyway. He was already there when she came through the terrace door. This time he was standing at the railing, not sitting, his back to her, looking north toward the river. Dorian will be reassigned within 48 hours, he said. His arrangement with the POS system and the tip pool has been operational for 8 months. You're not the first person it affected. She stopped. How long have you known about it? Since this morning. You didn't know before? No. She exhaled. And the back pay. It'll show up in everyone's account by end of week. No deduction. No processing fee. He turned. There won't be any record of how the complaint was identified. She looked at him. I filed with the labor board. I know. That filing still stands. I wouldn't expect otherwise. She stood with her arms crossed, not defensively, just because the wind was cold. Why are you telling me? You could have just done it. Because you're the one who stood in front of him and said it to his face, Raphael said. And I wanted you to know that didn't go unnoticed. She didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't used to people noticing things she did and then telling her they'd noticed without wanting something back. The arithmetic of it felt off. You didn't have to get involved, she said. I own the building. An employee was stealing from other employees under my roof. Something moved in his expression. Not quite anger. Something older than anger. That's my problem. You sure that's the only reason? He looked at her. The wind moved between them. No, he said. She nodded slowly. She let the silence sit. Below them, the city went on being a city, indifferent and enormous, and lit up orange all the way to the horizon. I'm going to get fired now, she said. Probably. You're not going to get fired. He has friends in scheduling. He no longer has access to scheduling. She looked at him for a moment. You're very sure of yourself. Yes. That must be exhausting. He was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in his face, barely visible in the bad light. Not quite a smile, but something that had the memory of one built into it. Occasionally, he said. She turned back toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped. Thank you, she said, for the other night, for letting me sleep. You needed to sleep. Most people would have woken me up. He said nothing to that. She went inside. She rode the elevator down alone, her keyring in her hand, her coat over her arm, and she was careful not to examine whatever it was that had shifted somewhere behind her sternum when he'd said the word occasionally in exactly that tone. She was careful not to examine it because she recognized it, and she could not afford what it cost. 3 days later, Dorian Slade's office was empty. The nameplate was gone. By Friday, the back pay appeared in every affected employee's account, itemized under a line labeled Wage Correction. Administrative review, no further explanation. Nobody in the lounge talked about it openly, but in the way of closed workplaces, everyone understood something had happened. Glances were exchanged. Someone left a coffee on Marin's tray station without explanation. The woman who worked the coat check, whose name was Anika and who had worked at Kingsley Tower for 9 years, stopped Marine in the corridor and said only, "Whatever you did, thank you." "I filed a complaint with the labor board," Marin said. Anika looked at her. "Sure you did." Marin didn't explain further. She returned to the rooftop 3 more times over the following 2 weeks. He was there on 2 of those nights. They didn't arrange it. She wasn't sure either of them could have explained what they were doing or what to call it, or where the boundary was between 2 people who happened to be in the same place and 2 people who were making sure they were in the same place. But Marin had started leaving the south rail chairs until last, which took 11 seconds longer than the logical stacking order, and she could feel that choice in the back of her throat every time she made it. On the second night, he said, "You mentioned your second job. The breakfast counter. Yeah. You've been there long. 7 months. Before that, she was quiet for a moment. I managed events, catering coordination, corporate contracts. She kept her voice even. I ran the operations side for a mid-sized firm for 4 years, handled logistics for events up to 2,000 attendees. What happened? The firm folded. She paused. Among other things. He didn't push it. She was aware that he could. She was aware that a man with the information networks Raphael Vance clearly had access to could know considerably more about those other things if he'd looked. She didn't know whether he had. She didn't ask. What she knew was that, among other things, covered the specific 18-month period she did not discuss with anyone, the accident that had taken her brother and her sister-in-law, the guardianship application that followed, the legal debt that accrued when the guardianship failed anyway, because she couldn't demonstrate financial stability while simultaneously paying the lawyers trying to help her demonstrate financial stability. The debt she was still working against, quietly, from the bottom of 2 jobs. She was not going to tell him that on a rooftop. But she looked at the way he sat with his glass in his hand and his eyes on the lake, and she recognized the posture of a person who also had things they were not going to say on a rooftop, and something about that was its own form of conversation. On the 3rd night, she found him already at the south rail before she started cleaning. He had a second glass on the table beside his. He didn't look at her when she came in. She cleaned the whole terrace. She stacked all the chairs in the correct order. She wiped the bar. She did not sit down until she was done. And when she was done, she crossed to the low sectional and sat. And he handed her the second glass, and she took it, and they watched the city together for 40 minutes without speaking more than a dozen words. She went home on the overnight bus and sat in the back and kept her hands around her phone and stared at the seat back in front of her. What she felt was something she had not felt in 2 years. She felt like a person again. Not a shift, not a payment plan, not a file number in a probate court's deceased person database. A person, a specific one. She pressed her lips together and stared at the seat back and told herself firmly that this was exactly the kind of feeling she could not afford. She told herself that 3 more times on the walk from the bus stop to her apartment. She was still telling herself that when she unlocked the door and stepped inside and found the envelope on her floor. Slipped under the door, no return address, her name printed in block letters on the outside. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not a letter, not a threat. Just a name she recognized and a number she recognized. And the words, "We know what you've been doing. Distance yourself, or this gets complicated." She stood in her dark entryway with her coat still on and the envelope in her hand and read it twice. Her first thought was Dorian. Her second thought was that Dorian didn't have this kind of reach. Her third thought was the one that arrived quietly but landed with significant weight. Whatever was happening around Raphael Vance was larger than a dismissed lounge manager, and she had just, without intending to, walked into the middle of it. She set the envelope on her kitchen table. She went to the sink and ran the water and stood there for a long time looking at the drain. She had rebuilt her life from nothing before. She could disappear again. The question was whether she was going to decide to before whoever sent that envelope decided it for her. Marin did not sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with the envelope in front of her and her coat still on until the radiator knocked itself awake at 5:30 and the gray Chicago morning started pressing through the window above the sink. She made coffee she didn't drink. She turned the sheet of paper over twice, as if the back might say something different. It didn't. It said nothing at all, which was its own kind of statement. Whoever had sent this didn't need to explain themselves. They expected her to understand the grammar of a threat delivered without a signature. She understood it fine. At 7, she put on her work shoes for the breakfast counter and walked to the bus stop and stood in the cold with her hands in her pockets and thought about what she actually knew versus what she was assuming. What she knew. Someone had identified her by name. Someone knew about the rooftop. Someone wanted her away from Raphael Vance badly enough to put paper under her door in the middle of the night. What she was assuming, that this was connected to the network of people who depended on Raphael's world staying exactly as it was. People who would view a lounge waitress with access to his private rooftop the way you'd view a crack in a load-bearing wall. The bus came. She got on. She stared out the window at the lake. She had rebuilt before. She knew the steps. You stopped accumulating, you cut connections, you made yourself hard to locate and harder to care about. She had done it after the accident, after the lawyers, after the guardianship collapse. She had made herself into a very small, very quiet thing that cost nothing and expected nothing and was in that way almost impossible to hurt. But she was not that person anymore. Or she hadn't been these past 3 weeks. And she wasn't sure when exactly that had happened. She got to work 6 minutes late and tied on her apron and said nothing to anyone about any of it. Lucan Brandt had an office on the 38th floor of Kingsley Tower, 2 floors below Raphael's primary suite. The office was the kind of space that communicated its occupants' importance through restraint. No overt display, no unnecessary furniture, just clean lines and a view and the specific silence of a room where consequential things were decided and then not discussed. He was at his desk at 8:45 when his phone showed a notification from a number he kept unlisted. He read it, set the phone face down, picked up his coffee and looked out at the lake. Maren Cole. Still in the building, still on the schedule. He had expected her to be gone by now. Most people, when you put something under their door at 2 in the morning, they started making calculations. They decided the math didn't work. They made themselves scarce. Lucan had seen it happen reliably enough that he'd built it into his operational model, a single well-placed pressure point, and the variable resolved itself. But she had come back to work, which meant either she was stubborn or she was stupid or she had calculated something differently than he expected. He did not believe she was stupid. He had read her file. He had read it more carefully than most people read things. Maren Cole was not stupid. She had a history that suggested the opposite. A woman who had survived real loss and real financial catastrophe and had rebuilt herself without anyone's help. That kind of person didn't frighten easily, which meant the envelope had told her something without frightening her. It had told her she was visible. It had told her that her connection to Raphael was known, and instead of running, she had stayed. That was a problem. Not because Maren Cole was a threat to Lucan's plans and herself. She wasn't. She was a waitress with 2 jobs and a debt she'd been quietly servicing for 2 years. She had no leverage, no connections, no institutional power of any kind. What she had was worse. She had Raphael's attention in a way that nothing had held it in years. And Raphael's attention, properly redirected, was the one variable that could unmake every arrangement Lucan had spent the last 3 years building. Lucan turned away from the window and picked up his phone again. He needed to know how far it had gone. Raphael was in a meeting with 2 of his operations directors when his assistant knocked and said Lucan was asking for 15 minutes. He told her to hold him to 30 and ended the meeting early. Lucan came in with the particular posture of a man who has organized his face into something comfortable before entering the room. Raphael had known him for 11 years. He knew every configuration Lucan's face made. "The Mercer Street property," Lucan said, settling into the chair across from the desk. "The permit's been delayed again. City inspector is asking for a secondary review." "Which inspector?" "Fowler." "But I don't think it's Fowler driving it. The request came from above his pay grade." Raphael nodded. "Deal with it the way we dealt with the Wabash situation." "That's what I thought. I wanted confirmation." Lucan paused in the particular way that meant he'd already said the thing he came in to say and was now going to say the thing he actually came in to say. "There's something else." Raphael waited. "The lounge staff situation." Lucan kept his voice even. "The Dorian Slade reassignment. People are talking about it. Let them. It draws attention. The way it happened? No documented complaint, no HER process, just a manager gone overnight. People are filling in the blanks. People can fill in whatever blanks they want." "Raphael?" Lucan set his hands flat on the desk in a gesture that was either earnest or a very practiced imitation of it. "You know I only come to you with things that matter. This matters. There's a perception forming that a staff member on 40 has a direct line to you. That perception becomes a liability, for you and for her." The room was quiet. On the window behind Raphael, the city was pale and overcast, the lake the color of dirty ice. "Her name is Maren Cole," Raphael said. "She's on the lounge floor 4 nights a week. She did nothing wrong." That's not what I'm saying. Then be specific. Lucan was quiet for a moment. You've been on the rooftop 3 times in the last 2 weeks on nights she closes. Raphael looked at him steadily. He kept his expression neutral. The practice of keeping his expression neutral in front of Lucan Brandt was something he had been doing for 11 years, and it came without effort, the way old habits do. You're watching my schedule, Raphael said. I'm watching the building's security logs, which is my job. Your job is operations. Operations include security. They looked at each other. There was a long history in the look, and most of it was cordial, and most of the cordiality was built on a very specific mutual understanding of what each of them was and what they were owed. Raphael had built something, and Lucan had helped him protect it. In exchange, Lucan had been paid well, trusted absolutely, and given authority that most men in his position would not have been given. But there was something new in Lucan's eyes this morning. Raphael had seen something like it before, in other men, at other points in his career. He filed the observation away. We're done with this conversation, Raphael said. Lucan stood. Of course. He moved toward the door, stopped. The Mercer Street permit. I'll have it resolved by end of week. Good. After Lucan left, Raphael sat for a long time looking at the middle distance above his desk. He thought about the phrase liability for her and the precise calibration required to deliver it with exactly that much concern and exactly that little threat. He picked up his phone and called Decker. I need a log of every access request to the 40 security system for the last 60 days, he said, and I need it without going through Lucan. So Marin was restocking the service station at the end of her Thursday lounge shift when the new manager introduced himself. His name was Garrett. He was in his mid-40s, soft-spoken, clearly uncomfortable in the role of delivering news to people, which was how Marin knew the news was not good. We're making some scheduling adjustments, Garrett said. He had a clipboard. He was the kind of man who held a clipboard when he needed something to do with his hands. Closing shifts on 40 are going to be consolidated. Fewer staff, rotating basis. And my slot. He looked at the clipboard. You're on the rotation, just not exclusively. She understood. I'm being cut back. It's a restructure. Everyone on the floor is affected. How many hours? Potentially 4 to 6 fewer per week. For now. She thought about the number. 4 to 6 hours times her hourly rate minus tax, minus the tip average for closing shift, minus the bus fare adjustment. She ran it in her head without changing her expression. Okay, she said. He looked slightly relieved that she hadn't made it difficult. She almost told him not to bother being relieved because she was furious, just not at him. She went back to restocking. Later, in the corridor near the elevator bank, Anika found her. Garrett pulled 3 of us from closing rotation, Anika said. She was keeping her voice low out of habit. Me, you, and Deshi. You know who he didn't touch? Marin waited. The 2 staff members who were on Dorian's unofficial favorite list, the ones who weren't in the tip pool. Anika's jaw was tight. This isn't a restructure. I know. Then you know someone is... I know. Marin said it quietly, but with enough weight that Anika stopped. I know what it is. I just need to figure out what I'm going to do about it. Anika looked at her for a moment. You sure you want to do anything? Because what it looks like from the outside, the thing that brought this down, it's bigger than Dorian. Yeah. So maybe leave it. Marin looked at her. He stole from you for 8 months. And I got it back. So maybe that's the win. And the smart thing is... The smart thing, Marin said, was probably not filing the labor complaint. The smart thing was probably not saying anything in that meeting. I'm not always good at the smart thing. Anika was quiet. Then, you need to be careful. I am careful. More careful than that. Marin pulled on her coat. She said nothing else. She went to the rooftop that night. She didn't plan it. She finished her work, took the service elevator to 40, and stood at the terrace door for a long moment with her hand on the handle, telling herself she was going to leave. She opened the door. He was there. He was standing at the north railing this time, his phone in his hand, and he looked up when she came in and she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not anger exactly, but a proximity to it. The tension that lives adjacent to anger when a controlled person is processing something they haven't yet decided how to handle. She crossed to the low sectional, sat. You look like someone just handed you a problem. Several. He pocketed his phone. Your hours were cut. She looked at him. You found out fast. I found out because I was already looking at scheduling irregularities. Yours wasn't the only change. Who made the call? He was quiet. Raphael. She said his name for the first time. It surprised both of them slightly. Who made the call? Someone who believes they're managing a problem. And the problem is me. He moved away from the railing, came to sit in the chair opposite her, the one he'd first pulled to the south railing. He sat forward, elbows on his knees. Up close in the low light, he looked like a man carrying something that had been getting heavier for a long time. There's a person in my organization, he said carefully, who has been watching this building more carefully than his role requires. I've been aware of it for some time. I underestimated the direction it would move. He sent someone to my apartment. The shift in Raphael's expression was small and total, like a door closing very fast. Tell me exactly what you received, he said. She told him. The envelope, the name, the number, the phrasing. He listened without interrupting. His hands were still on his knees. He was very still in the way that very dangerous people are still when they are deciding something. You kept it, he said when she finished. Of course I kept it. I need it. I know. She held his gaze. But I need you to tell me something first. He waited. Whatever is happening in your organization, whatever this person is building, am I in it because of you, or am I in it because of me? He held her gaze for a long moment. The wind was quiet tonight. Somewhere far below them a car alarm started and stopped. Both, he said. She appreciated that he didn't hesitate. She appreciated it with the specific, tired appreciation of someone who has been told comfortable things for too long and knows immediately when they're hearing something real. Then I need you to be honest with me about what I'm inside of, she said. Not the version you'd tell someone you're protecting, the actual version. He looked at her for a long time. She didn't look away. There are parts of what I've built, he said slowly, that I built with methods I wouldn't describe in this conversation. There are people whose loyalty I hold through mechanisms that aren't clean. And there is someone in my inner circle who has spent the better part of 3 years positioning himself to inherit everything I have, and who has recently identified that you are the clearest pressure point available to him. Because he thinks you care what happens to me. Yes. Do you? The question landed between them. He didn't answer immediately. The city hummed. Yes, he said. She exhaled. She looked at the floor for a moment. At the tiled terrace, the gaps between pavers, the thin line of city light coming through the railing. I'm going to lose more hours, she said. He's going to keep applying pressure. He won't touch your employment after tonight. Because you'll stop him. Yes. And that'll make it worse. He paused. She saw him recognize that she was right. Every time you move something to protect me, she said, it confirms to him that I'm the lever. You pull me out of the scheduling problem, he finds another way in. You fix the next thing, he escalates. That's how this goes, isn't it? Raphael said nothing. His jaw was tight. I need you to tell me what his name is, she said. No. Raphael, if I tell you his name, you become a direct witness to information about an internal dispute in my organization that makes you a target in a different and more serious way. His voice was controlled, but there was iron underneath it. That is not happening. I know you can handle things. He said it with a force that surprised her. Not anger, something else. That is the problem. You handle things and it costs you, and you act like the cost is just part of the equation, and I'm telling you it is not. He stopped. He looked at the floor for a moment. When he looked up, his voice was quieter. I am telling you that it is not. The silence between them had a different texture now. She wanted to say something sharp in response, something that put distance between what he'd just said and what it had done to something behind her sternum. She didn't say it. It wouldn't have been honest. Then what do, Ike? She said. Let me handle this. The last time I let someone else handle something, I ended up with a debt that took me 2 years to partially climb out of and a guardianship case that failed anyway. So you'll understand if "let me handle it" is not a phrase that sits well with me. He looked at her. She saw him absorbing that, not the specifics, which she hadn't given him, but the weight of it. The particular weight of someone who has learned what happens when you hand your problems to someone else. "This is different," he said. "Why?" "Because I have something at stake." She looked at him. The question she wanted to ask was obvious, and she didn't ask it, and he didn't answer it, and that was its own kind of answer. She stood up, pulled her coat around her. "I'll bring you the envelope tomorrow." "Thank you." She started toward the door. Halfway there, she stopped. "The thing in your past," she said, not turning around. "The thing that made you start coming up here at 2 in the morning. You don't have to tell me what it is, but I need to know if it's going to affect what's happening right now." Long pause. "His name was Eli," Raphael said. "He was 4 years old. And no, it won't affect what's happening right now. It affects everything else." She stood with her back to him and her hand on the door. "Okay," she said. She went inside. She rode down 40 floors and walked out of the building and stood on the sidewalk in the cold and did not move for almost a full minute. Around her, the city conducted its late-night business, taxis and delivery trucks, and a couple coming out of a restaurant across the street, laughing about something. She thought about a man sitting on a rooftop with a drink, and the name of a 4-year-old boy, and the specific quality of silence that lives in a person who has lost someone they cannot replace. She thought about the envelope on her kitchen table. She thought about Anika saying more careful than that with her jaw tight. She started walking toward the bus stop. She had 3 blocks before she would have to decide whether to call anyone, and she spent all 3 of them thinking she should, and arrived at the bus stop having called no one. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Not the same as the first. Different area code. The message was 4 words. 2 days. Leave Chicago. She stared at it. The bus pulled up. The doors opened. She got on. She sat in the back and put her phone face down on her knee and looked at the seat back in front of her and recognized with a cold and very specific clarity that whoever was on the other side of this had just moved from warning to deadline, and that the difference between those 2 things was the difference between a door being held open and a door being locked from the outside. 2 days. She pressed her back against the seat and looked at the dark window, and behind her reflection the city went by, block by block, all that orange light smearing past, and she thought she had rebuilt once from nothing. She had done it when she was already broken, when she had nothing left and no one to help her, and a debt she hadn't created and a loss she hadn't deserved. She could do it again. The question arrived quietly, the way the worst questions always do. Did she want to? The bus turned south and the lake disappeared behind the buildings, and she sat with that question and did not answer it for a long time. And the not answering was itself an answer she wasn't ready to say out loud. She gave herself until morning to decide. That was the agreement she made with herself on the bus, and she kept it the way she kept most agreements she made with herself. Rigidly, without negotiation, because the alternative was standing in the middle of her kitchen at 3 a.m. making decisions in the dark. And she had learned the hard way what kind of decisions got made in the dark. She slept 4 hours. She woke at 6. She made coffee and drank it standing at the sink and watched the alley below her window where a man was loading boxes into a van with the focused efficiency of someone who had done the same thing every morning for years. She watched him until the van pulled away. Then she put her cup in the sink and went to the kitchen table and sat down in front of the envelope. 2 days. Leave Chicago. She turned her phone over, looked at the message again. Then she opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she had not called in 8 months. A woman named Petra, who had been her operations contact at the events firm before it folded, who had since moved to a logistics company in Milwaukee, who had offered Marin a reference and then a position, and then, when Marin had declined both, had simply said the offer stood. Marin stared at Petra's name for a long time. Then she put the phone face down on the table and picked up the envelope and put it in her coat pocket and went to work. She was not going to call Petra, not yet. Not because she wasn't considering leaving, she was, with the cold and practiced efficiency of someone who had dismantled her life before and knew exactly which screws to turn first. She was considering it the way you consider an emergency exit. You locate it, you clock the distance, and then you turn back to whatever you were doing and hope you don't need it. What she needed first was to understand what she was actually inside of. Because the two messages, the envelope, the text, had a different character from each other. The envelope felt institutional, careful, the kind of thing a person sends when they want to apply pressure without leaving a legal trail. The text felt different, more direct, more urgent, like someone who had expected the first move to work and was recalibrating. Two different hands, possibly, or one hand under increasing pressure. Either way, something had changed in the last 48 hours, and she wanted to know what. Decker was not a man who looked like what he was. He was 53, medium height, wore the kind of dark jacket that suggested middle management at a firm that handled something unremarkable. He had a face like a closed door, not unfriendly, just offering nothing. He had worked personal security for Raphael Vance for 11 years, and in that time had developed the particular professional quality of being indispensable without ever being visible. He found Raphael in the primary suite at 7:15 with a single printed page. He set it on the desk without preamble. Raphael looked at it. It was an access log, the 40th floor security system. 60 days of query records showing which terminals had pulled footage, floor entry data, and personnel schedules for the rooftop level. The log was routine except for one pattern. A secondary terminal, registered to building operations, had pulled the same data set 9 times over a 40-day period, always between midnight and 2 a.m., always on nights when Raphael's private elevator had been active. The terminal registration led back to an account that had been set up 18 months ago under a facilities management credential. The credential had been issued to a contractor. The contractor had not worked in the building for 14 months. The account was still active because nobody had flagged it for deactivation. Because the person who managed access credential reviews reported, ultimately, to the head of building operations, who reported to Lucan Brandt. Raphael set the page down. He looked at the window. "How long have you known?" he said. "I identified the terminal 3 days ago," Decker said. "I wanted the full picture before I brought it to you." "And the full picture? The access pattern correlates with 11 of your rooftop visits over the last 6 weeks. Someone has been tracking your movements up there with enough precision to know when you arrived, how long you stayed, and on 4 specific occasions who else was on that level." Raphael was quiet for a moment. "Marin Cole. Her entry and exit times are in the pulled data, yes. Her employee file was accessed from the same terminal twice. Her home address is in the HR system." Decker paused. "I don't know what's been done with that information." Raphael picked up his phone. Then he set it down. He understood the impulse. Call her, confirm she was safe. And he also understood that the impulse was exactly what someone watching him would expect, and that acting on expected impulses was how controlled men became predictable men. He breathed. "I need everything Lucan has touched in the last 6 months," he said. "Not just operations, financials, external contacts, anything running through secondary channels. I want it in my hands before end of day." "That's a significant pull." "Yes." Decker picked up the access log, folded it. "There's one more thing." Raphael waited. "The external contact who sent the text to Ms. Cole's personal number. I traced the number's origin. It's a prepaid, purchased in cash, but the cell tower pings place it in the loop on Tuesday night, specifically within 2 blocks of this building." The room was very quiet. "So whoever sent it," Raphael said, "sent it from here, or within walking distance." Raphael stood. He moved to the window and stood with his hands in his pockets, looking down at the street 40 floors below. The city was doing its morning thing. Delivery trucks, commuters, the whole indifferent machinery of Chicago grinding forward the way it always did regardless of what was happening in the buildings above it. "Where's Lucan right now?" he said. 38th floor. He has a 9 o'clock with the Mercer Street contractors." "Let him have it." Raphael turned. "Don't move on anything yet. I want to know the full shape of this before he knows I'm looking." "Understood." Decker moved toward the door. stopped. The woman, do you want coverage on her? Raphael thought about what Marin would say if he put security on her without telling her. He thought about it precisely and arrived at a specific answer. Not yet, he said. But I want her location trackable. Voluntary only. Don't approach her. If anything changes, I want to know inside of 10 minutes. Decker left. Raphael stood at the window for a long time after he was gone. He was thinking about a ghost account in a facilities management system that had been watching his rooftop for 6 weeks. He was thinking about the specific calculation that required, the patience of it, the planning. You don't build a ghost credential to watch a rooftop for 6 weeks on a whim. You build it because you are assembling something, and you need information about the one variable you haven't accounted for yet. He had underestimated Lucan. Not his capability. He'd never underestimated that. His direction. He had assumed Lucan wanted the empire, the money, the network, the structural power of what Raphael had built. He had assumed that if Lucan ever moved against him, it would be a business play, a financial maneuver, something clean and quantifiable. He had not assumed that Lucan would move against a person. That was the miscalculation, and it mattered because it told him something about what Lucan had become, or perhaps what he had always been, and Raphael had simply chosen not to see clearly. Marin arrived at the tower at 3:50 for her 4 o'clock shift. She came through the employee entrance on the building's north side, badged in, took the staff elevator to the locker area on 12. She hung her coat. She transferred the envelope from her coat pocket to the inside pocket of her work jacket. She went upstairs. The lounge was quiet in the pre-opening hour. Garrett was doing inventory at the service station. 2 of the other floor staff were rolling silverware at the far table. Nobody paid her particular attention. She went to her station and began setting up. At 4:40, a man she had never seen before sat down at the bar. This was not unusual in itself. The bar opened at 4:30, and occasionally someone came in early, usually a hotel guest, or someone killing time before dinner. This man was in his mid-40s, well-dressed in a way that read expensive without announcing it, with close-cropped gray at his temples, and the particular ease of someone who spent a great deal of time in rooms where he was the most important person present. He ordered a club soda. He did not look at the menu. She was not his section. She continued setting up her station. At 5:10, he was still there. He had not ordered anything else. He had not looked at his phone. He was simply sitting at the bar looking at the middle distance with the patience of a man who was waiting for a specific thing and had decided to wait as long as it took. At 5:15, he looked directly at her. She kept her expression neutral and went back to the wine list she was updating, but her pulse had done something she didn't like, and she noted it the way you note a sound in a building that you can't immediately identify. At 5:22, Garrett came to her station. "Table 4 is asking for you specifically," he said. He had his clipboard. He was doing the thing with his hands. "I'm not on 4s tonight." "I know." He asked by name. She looked up. Garrett's face was doing something uncomfortable. She looked toward table 4. The man from the bar had moved. He was sitting at a corner table, club soda in front of him, watching her with the calm of someone who has already decided how this conversation ends. She walked over. She did not bring a notepad. "Marin Cole," the man said. Not a question. "Can I help you?" "Sit down." "I'm working." "I know you are." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, please. This won't take long, and it's better for both of us if it looks like a regular conversation." She did not sit. She stood with her hands at her sides and looked at him and waited. He smiled slightly. "My name is Harlan Cross. I work in advisory services. My clients sometimes have interests that intersect with people in your situation." He picked up his club soda, set it down. "I want to talk to you about Raphael Vance. I'm a waitress in his building. You're considerably more than that at this point." He said it without edge, just as information. "And that's not a criticism, it's context." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm going to be straightforward with you because I think you're someone who responds better to straightforward. There are people who would benefit from certain information about Raphael Vance's current operations. Those people are willing to provide very specific assistance in return. Debt resolution. Relocation resources. A genuine position. Not a breakfast counter. Not closing shifts. Something that reflects what you're actually capable of. She looked at him. You want me to give you information about Raphael? I want you to consider a relationship that would be mutually beneficial. You want me to inform on him? He didn't blink. I want you to consider your options. Who sent the envelope? She said. A pause. Brief, but there. I don't know what you're referring to. The text. 2 nights ago. Leave Chicago. His expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. A recalibration, a very small one. I'm not connected to anything like that. So there are multiple people interested in my relationship with Raphael Vance. Ms. Cole, who are you working for? He looked at her for a long moment, then he sat back. Some of the practiced ease went out of his posture. What was underneath it was harder. I work for people who have been waiting a long time for a particular window to open. That window is currently open. They want to move through it cleanly. He folded his hands on the table. You can help them do that and be compensated well, or you can stay where you are and be in the way when things move. Those are the options. You're not from Lucan Brandt. The name landed. She watched his face. He was good. There was almost nothing, but the almost was enough. I don't know that name, he said. You just told me everything I needed to know, she said. She walked back to her station. Her hands were steady. Her pulse was not. She picked up the wine list and stared at it and did not read a single word on it. 2 separate operations. Lucan on the inside, running pressure through scheduling and building access. Harlan Cross on the outside, offering a transaction. They weren't working together. The envelope and the text had Lucan's fingerprints, but Cross was coming from somewhere else. Some external interest that had been watching Raphael's empire for long enough to know that a window was opening. They both wanted the same thing. They just had different ideas about how to use her to get it. She looked up. Cross was gone. His club soda glass was on the table with a business card under it. She left the card where it was. Sick. She texted Raphael at 9:45 from the staff corridor. Harlan Cross. Sat at my bar tonight. Claims to work in advisory services. Knew your name, not connected to the envelope. Different operation, same target. He offered me a transaction. The response came in 4 minutes. Don't touch the card he left. Stay on shift. I'll be on 40 when you close. She put her phone away and went back to the floor and worked 4 more hours with her face arranged into the professional expression she had spent years perfecting. Present, pleasant, giving nothing away. She poured wine and described specials and cleared plates and counted down the hours and did not look toward the bar. At 1:15, she started closing procedures. At 1:40, she rode the service elevator to 40. He was already there. He was not sitting. He was standing at the center of the terrace with his jacket on and his phone in his hand and the look of a man who had spent the last several hours taking in information he did not like and was now deciding what to do with it. She told him everything Cross had said, verbatim, in the order it happened. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Harlan Cross, he said. He's been on the periphery of 3 deals in the last 2 years, always representing unnamed clients, always positioning just outside the line of anything I could act on directly. His jaw tightened. He's a transaction broker. He doesn't work for Lucan. He works for a separate group who's been watching my operation and waiting for internal fracture. And Lucan is the fracture. Lucan is the fracture they've been cultivating. He said it was something flat and cold underneath it, which means this didn't start recently. This is years of positioning. Someone with patience and resources identified Lucan's ambition and has been feeding it, waiting for the moment it broke open. She looked at him. How long have you known about Lucan? I've been building a picture for 8 days. And before that, silence. Raphael. I had indications, he said. Things I attributed to other causes. I did not want to believe a specific thing, so I allowed myself to read the evidence in a way that didn't require me to believe it. He said it without self-pity, just as a fact, a hard one. That was a mistake. She sat down on the low sectional. She pressed her hands flat on her knees and looked at the terrace floor and let what he'd just said settle into the full shape of what it meant. He's been watching this rooftop for 6 weeks, she said. Yes. So he knows about... She stopped. He knows we've been meeting up here. Yes. And he weaponized it. He used me as the pressure point specifically because he's been watching long enough to know you'd respond. Yes, she breathed. How much does Cross's group know about me? Enough to find you, enough to know the debt situation, enough to build an offer that would look attractive. My file. Either from Lucan or from a separate source. Possibly both. He moved toward her. Not to sit, he stopped a few feet away and stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at her with the expression of a man who is about to say something he has been deciding whether to say. There's something else. Decker found it 2 hours ago. She looked up at him. The firm you worked for, he said carefully. The events company that folded. Cole Mercer Group. Her chest did something cold and immediate. She had not told him the name of the firm. The collapse of that company, Raphael said, was not a natural business failure. The primary investor withdrew capital over a period of 4 months through a series of shell transactions. The withdrawal was designed to look like market losses. It was structured specifically to leave the firm with an unsecured debt liability that passed to the operating directors. He paused. You were not an operating director, but you had a co-signature on 2 of the company's asset accounts because you ran operations. That co-signature made you partially liable for the residual debt. She was very still. The investor who engineered the withdrawal, he said, the shell structure he used. Decker traced it back through 3 intermediary accounts. He stopped. He looked at her with something in his eyes that was not pity, but was in the vicinity of it, something careful and braced. The origin account belongs to a holding company registered in Delaware. That holding company has 1 active director of record. Don't, she said. Marin, don't say it. Her voice was very quiet and very level, and both of those things were costing her. He said it anyway. Because he understood, she thought later, that she needed to hear it from someone other than the inside of her own head. Lucan Brandt, he said, the collapse of your firm, your debt, the guardianship failure. Lucan was the architect of all of it. 2 years before he ever knew your name, his financial operations destroyed your life. And then 6 weeks ago, when he identified you as a pressure point against me, he found out that the woman on my rooftop was the same woman his money had already broken once. The terrace was very quiet. She became aware of her own breathing, became aware of her hands on her knees, the specific pressure of her palms against her kneecaps, the cold, the distant orange blur of the city below the railing, the fact that she had been sitting in this exact spot for 3 weeks coming up here to be near a man who was, she now understood, connected by a straight line to the worst period of her life. Not intentionally, not knowingly, but connected nonetheless through the man who stood inside his walls. She stood up. She walked to the railing, put both hands on it and looked out at the city and breathed. Behind her, Raphael said nothing. He understood, apparently, that this was not a moment for words. That was either wisdom or cowardice, and she was not in a position to determine which. She stood there for a long time. Her brother, her sister-in-law. The accident she hadn't caused and couldn't have prevented. The guardianship application filed 4 months later for the sake of 2 children she loved who then went to a state placement anyway because she couldn't show financial stability, because the debt had already begun accruing, because the co-signature on those accounts had already become a liability she didn't know how to discharge. The children were in Wisconsin now. She had stopped checking because checking cost her something she needed for other things. The firm's collapse had not been misfortune. It had been manufactured. Someone had looked at Cole Mercer Group and decided it was a useful vehicle for generating untraceable debt and walked away from the wreckage without once knowing who was standing in it. She turned around. I need to see the documentation, she said. Her voice was different now, not louder, quieter, in the way that very cold water is quiet. Everything Decker found, every account, every transaction, every shell company in the chain. I need to see it. Raphael looked at her. All right. And I need to know who else is involved in his operation, Cross's clients, the people who've been feeding Lucan, everyone. Marin, I am not running, she said. It came out with a force she hadn't planned, something that rose from the part of her that had spent 2 years in survival mode and was done, was completely done, with running being the only available response to things being done to her. I am not leaving Chicago. I am not taking Cross's offer, and I am not disappearing, and I am not going to let Lucan Brandt spend 1 more day believing that I am something he can move around aboard. Raphael was very still. "Whatever you're planning," she said, "I'm in it. Not as someone you're protecting, as someone with skin in this." He looked at her for a long moment. The city behind her was doing its relentless orange thing. "The documentation will be in your hands by morning," he said. She nodded. She picked up her bag, she put on her coat, she moved toward the door. "Marin." His voice was low. She stopped. "What Lucan did to your life 2 years ago," he said. "He did not know you. It was not personal. That does not make it better. But I need you to know that I did not know. That if I had known, it would never—" "I know," she said. She said it before he could finish because hearing the rest of it was going to cost her something she needed to keep. "I know you didn't know." She pushed through the door. In the elevator going down, she pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes and stayed that way for all 40 floors. And when the doors opened on the lobby level, she walked through them and out into the cold Chicago night, and she did not stop walking until she had covered 2 full blocks and the building was behind her. Then she stopped. She stood on the sidewalk with her breath coming in visible clouds in the October cold, and she understood with the specific and devastating clarity of a person who has just had the architecture of their suffering explained to them that the last 2 years of her life, every double shift, every missed payment, every legal form filed in a fluorescent-lit office, every night she had lain awake calculating whether she had enough, all of it traced back to a single man who had never looked at her face. She had one thought. It was not a charitable thought. She started walking again. Behind her in the lobby of Kingsley Tower, a camera she didn't know about tracked her until she moved out of frame, and the feed from that camera was watched by 2 separate people in 2 separate rooms of the same building, each of them now understanding that Marin Cole had just crossed the line from variable to participant, and that nothing from this point forward was going to move the way either of them had planned. The documentation arrived at 6:12 in the morning, not by email, by Decker, in person, at her apartment door in Pilsen, with a manila envelope and the expression of a man who had been awake all night and had developed a professional relationship with that condition. He did not come inside. He handed her the envelope, He said to call if you have questions, and left. She stood in her doorway in her work clothes from the night before and listened to his footsteps go down the stairwell. Then she went inside and sat at her kitchen table and opened the envelope. 41 pages. Account records, transaction logs, shell company registrations, a timeline Decker had constructed in clean block type running from 38 months ago to the present. She read it the way she had learned to read legal documents during the guardianship proceedings, slowly, without reacting, building the structure in her head before she allowed herself to feel anything about it. It took her an hour and 20 minutes. When she finished, she set the last page down and looked at the wall above her kitchen sink. There was a crack in the plaster above the faucet she had been meaning to report to her landlord for 4 months. She looked at it for a while. Lucan Brandt had engineered the collapse of Cole Mercer Group as a financial maneuver in a broader capital acquisition. The firm's client list and contract portfolio had been absorbed by a holding entity connected to his network within 90 days of the bankruptcy filing. The debt Marine carried was a residual artifact of that absorption, a loose end that had never been deliberately aimed at her. She had simply been standing in the wrong place in the financial structure. That was somehow worse than if it had been targeted. Targeted meant she had mattered enough to aim at. This meant she had not mattered at all. She had been collateral, the way furniture gets damaged when you move it carelessly from one room to another. She showered, she changed, she did not sleep. At 8:45, her phone rang. Unknown number, but she recognized the cell tower prefix from the text 2 nights ago. She answered. Silence for 3 seconds. Then a voice she didn't recognize, male, flat, with the accent of someone from somewhere in the industrial Midwest. "Ms. Cole, I'm going to say this once. You were asked to leave. You didn't. Mr. Brandt would like you to understand that the next conversation won't be a text message." She said, "Tell Mr. Brandt I have 41 pages of transaction records that establish his connection to the fraudulent collapse of Cole Mercer Group. Tell him I've already made copies. And tell him that if anything happens to me or to anyone connected to me, those copies go to 3 separate recipients simultaneously." She paused. "Now, was there something else?" Long silence. The call ended. She put the phone down on the table and pressed both hands flat against the surface and breathed until the shaking in her fingers stopped. It took about 40 seconds. Then she picked up the phone and called Raphael. He answered on the second ring, which meant he had been awake. "They called me," she said. "I know. Decker monitors the number." His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it that was not quite controlled. "Are you all right?" "Yes. I made the play you said to make if they contacted me directly." "Good." A pause. "Marin, I need you to come to the building, not the lounge entrance, the parking structure on Wabash, level 2. Decker will meet you." "What happened?" "Lucan moved this morning. He's accelerating everything." His voice was flat and very precise. "He knows I've been building a case against him. Someone inside my documentation process told him. I don't know who yet." She was already standing, already putting on her coat. "How much time?" "I don't know. Come now." She was out the door in 90 seconds. The parking structure on Wabash smelled like cold concrete and exhaust, and the particular damp of a Chicago structure that had been absorbing lake air for 30 years. Decker was on level 2 beside a dark sedan, arms crossed, watching the entrance ramp with the posture of a man counting variables. He opened the back door when he saw her. She got in. He got in the front. The car was already running. "Where are we going?" she said. "Tower. Secondary entrance." He pulled out before she could ask anything else. She looked out the window at the morning city going by. Delivery trucks, people with coffee, the whole ordinary machinery of 8:45 a.m. operating in complete indifference to whatever was happening inside Kingsley Tower. "How bad is it?" she said. Decker looked at her in the rear view. "Bad enough that he pulled 3 people off their regular assignments this morning to cover internal positions." He said it evenly, the way men say things they want you to receive as information and not as fear. "Lucan has been making calls since 6 a.m. He's activating external contacts." "Cross's people." A pause. "Possibly, and others." She looked at the back of his head. "You've been with Raphael 11 years. "Yes." "Have you seen him in a situation like this before?" Decker was quiet for a moment. "I've seen him in situations with higher operational stakes," he said carefully. "I have not seen him in a situation where the stakes were this kind." She understood what he meant. She looked back out the window. The car pulled into a narrow service lane on the building's south side. A steel door. A card reader. Decker badged them through, and they went up 2 floors in a service elevator that smelled like machine oil and emerged into a corridor she had never been in. Wider than the staff corridors she knew, lined with matte gray doors, no carpeting, harsh overhead fluorescence. Raphael was waiting. He was in the corridor, not an office, which told her the situation had the quality of something that hadn't stopped moving long enough for rooms to matter. He was in a dark jacket, no tie, with the look of someone who had shaved 48 hours ago and was now past it. He took in Marin's face when she came through the door, and something in his expression shifted. Not relief exactly, but the specific physical release of a tension you've been holding in your jaw. "Come with me," he said. They walked. He talked. Lucan sent 2 men to cross-reference the external documentation Decker pulled. They accessed the record storage on 36 at approximately 6 a.m. By the time my people identified the access, they had already photographed approximately 60% of the physical files, which means Lucan now knows the shape of the case against him. So he knows, you know. He has known for approximately 3 hours that I know the full scope. Raphael pushed through a door into a larger room. Conference space stripped of its usual furniture except for a long table covered in laptops and printed files and a whiteboard with names and connecting lines written in black marker. 2 men she didn't know stood at the far end looking at screens. Decker took a position near the door. "What that means is the window in which I could build a case and move on him through controlled channels has closed. He'll be moving to liquidate and transfer within hours. And if he transfers everything out of your reach, then the evidence trail becomes fragmented enough that legal pursuit takes years and recovers nothing." His voice was steady, but his hands, she noticed, were not entirely still. And then he starts over somewhere else with everything he took. She stood at the edge of the table and looked at the whiteboard. Names, accounts, arrows. Lucan's name at the center. Radiating out from it were connections she didn't recognize yet. External contacts, shell company names, a cluster on the right side of the board labeled cross/external with 3 names beneath it she hadn't seen in the documentation. "What do you need?" she said. He looked at her. Lucan has one account that he cannot transfer electronically. It's a legacy account. Paper instrument requires in-person authorization from 2 signatories. He picked up a file from the table. I am one of the signatories. The account was set up as a joint authorization account 12 years ago when I still believed in contingency planning with partners. He set the file down. If he gets to that account before I freeze it, he walks out with enough capital to disappear and rebuild. If I freeze it first, everything else cascades. The shell companies, the external contacts, all of it. Where is the account held? A private banking office on Michigan. 11 floors, no public entrance, appointment only. He looked at her steadily. He has a meeting there at 11:30, which is in... He checked his watch. 2 hours and 17 minutes. She looked at the whiteboard, then at him. You're going. Yes. And Lucan will know you're going. He'll find out when I'm already there. He has external contacts activated. You said that. Yes. And Decker and 2 other people is what you have. He held her gaze. I made the mistake of trusting broadly for too long. I'm working with what that left me. She thought about the 41 pages on her kitchen table. She thought about the crack in her plaster wall. She thought about 45 minutes on a rooftop with a glass of wine she didn't pick for herself, and a man looking at a lake with the expression of someone who had forgotten what it felt like to put something down. I'm coming with you, she said. No. Raphael. You are not trained for... I ran operations for 200 corporate events, she said. I know how private banking appointments work. I know what a hostile meeting looks like, and I know how to stay in a room when someone is trying to get me out of it. She held his gaze. You need a second body in that room, and you need someone Lucan hasn't already mapped. He knows Decker. He knows everyone you have left. He doesn't know what I'll do because I haven't done anything yet. The 2 men at the far end of the table were looking at their screens with the focused attention of people who were absolutely listening. Raphael looked at her for a long moment. You stay behind me when we enter, he said. If anyone moves that isn't Decker, you get low and stay there. You do not engage. You do not speak unless I tell you to. His jaw was tight. Those are not negotiable. Understood, she said. He held her gaze one more second. Then he turned to the table. They had 2 hours. The car moved up Michigan at 11:14 with Decker driving and Marin in the back beside Raphael and a man named Cass, one of the few remaining people Raphael had moved off external assignments, in the passenger seat. The morning had gone gray and cold, the sky the color of wet concrete, the kind of Chicago day that didn't bother being dramatic about the weather, just delivered it flat and steady. Marin watched the city go by. She was wearing the same coat she'd had on since 6 a.m. She had not eaten. She was aware of both of these things as logistical facts with no current solution. Beside her, Raphael was on his phone. He had been on his phone for most of the last 2 hours, moving through conversations in a low and very controlled voice, each call short, each one closing a different door in Lucan's network. She had listened to him work. There was something in it, the precision, the economy of language, the way he said exactly what was needed and nothing more, that she recognized from the best operations directors she had worked with, the ones who kept their heads in the middle of genuine chaos. He ended a call and looked at his watch. The account manager at the banking office, he said to Decker. Confirm he received my authorization flag. Confirmed at 10:50, Decker said, and Lucan's appointment. Still on the books. He doesn't know I flagged the account for secondary review, which means he doesn't know the appointment requires my physical co-authorization to proceed. When he walks in and finds out, he'll try to run or he'll try to negotiate. Either way, you have him in a room. Or he doesn't walk in at all, Cass said from the front. He finds out before he gets there. Silence in the car. Raphael said, "Then we find out what kind of man he is when his exit closes." The car stopped at a light. Marin looked at the pedestrians crossing in front of them. A woman with a stroller, two men in suits, a teenager with headphones. The ordinary population of 11 a.m. on Michigan Avenue, none of them aware of the specific weight of the car they were walking in front of. "Raphael," she said. He looked at her. "The two children," she said, "from my guardianship application. I need you to know that whatever happens today, that's part of why I'm here. Not all of it, but part." He held her gaze. His expression was very still. "I know," he said. The light changed. The car moved. The banking office was on the 11th floor of a building that had no signage on its exterior except a street number and the name of a property management company that handled the lobby. Private wealth management operated through discretion, the way other businesses operated through advertising. You knew it was there if you needed to know. You didn't if you didn't. The elevator required a card key. Decker had one. They rode up in silence. Marin watched the floor numbers. Her pulse was doing something she didn't intend to perform, and she breathed against it steadily, the way she had breathed against bad shifts and worse nights, and the specific adrenaline of standing in a lounge manager's meeting and saying the thing nobody else in the room was going to say. The elevator opened onto a carpeted corridor with the hushed quality of a place where people came to discuss large amounts of money in small voices. A reception desk. A woman behind it in her 50s who had the immaculate composure of someone who dealt daily with people whose financial situations required composure from everyone in the room. She looked at Raphael. "Mr. Vance?" Not surprised. He had called ahead. "We have an 11:30, he said. "Of course. Mr. Hargrove is expecting you." She looked at Marin and Decker and Cass with the professional neutrality of a woman who had seen many configurations of people arrive for many kinds of meetings. "I'll let him know you're here." They were shown to a waiting area with two low sofas and a glass table and a window that looked north up Michigan. Marin sat. Raphael stood. Decker and Cass positioned near the corridor entrance in the way of people who were doing that for reasons that had nothing to do with decor. At 11:26, the elevator opened again. Lucan Brandt walked out alone. He was in a dark coat, a gray suit, carrying nothing. He had the look of a man who had gotten ready this morning with the deliberate care of someone preparing for a performance. Composed, certain, projecting the easy authority that Marin now understood had been built on a foundation of watching and waiting and calculated betrayal. He saw Raphael first. He stopped. The two men looked at each other across 15 feet of carpeted corridor. Marin watched Lucan's face work through the sequence. Recognition, calculation, the specific micro-expression of a man whose contingency models are running simultaneously in real time. Then he saw Marin. Something different moved through his face then. Not fear. Something more precise than fear. The expression of a man who has played a board game with great skill and has just understood that one of the pieces he assigned a fixed value has a value he never accounted for. "Raphael," Lucan said. His voice was entirely level. 11 years of practice. "Lucan," Raphael's voice was quieter, which was worse. "Sit down. I have a meeting." "I know, so do I. Turns out they're the same meeting." Raphael moved to one of the sofas. He sat. He looked at Lucan with the expression of a man who has arrived early to a conversation he has been building toward for years. "Sit down." Lucan's jaw moved. He looked at Decker, at Cass, at Marin. Then he sat on the sofa opposite. The receptionist had very professionally disappeared. Raphael said, "You accessed my documentation files at 6 a.m. I had operational reason." "Stop." Raphael said it without heat, which was worse than heat. "I have 41 months of financial records. I have the shell company registrations. I have the transaction chain from the Cole-Mercer collapse through to your current holding structure." He let that sit. "I have everything, Lucan. So the conversation we're about to have is not about whether, it's only about how." Lucan looked at him. His face had not fully settled on what it wanted to do. "You don't want to do this here." "I'm doing it here. There are things I know about your operation, about the early years, that would create significant problems for you if they became... If they became what? Raphael's voice was very flat. Public? Legal? You think I haven't spent the last 8 days accounting for every exposure point in my own history? He leaned forward. I built this. I know where every body is. Do you understand me? Everyone. I know because I was there. Were you there, Lucan? Or were you 3 steps behind taking notes? Lucan's face went very still. You told me 6 weeks ago that Marin was a liability, Raphael said. You used her word, liability. Something moved in his jaw. You engineered the collapse of her firm before you ever knew her name. You destroyed her financial life as a side effect of a capital grab, and then 3 years later you tried to use her as leverage against me. And you called her a liability. That's business, Lucan said. His voice had found its footing again, that particular register of a man who believes that if he sounds sure of himself long enough, the other person will begin to doubt themselves. You know that. You've done things... Not to people who didn't know they were in the game, Raphael said. He said it quietly, and it landed like something much louder. Lucan looked at Marin. He looked at her with the full attention he had not given her before, not as a piece on a board, but as a person in a room. She held his gaze without moving. Ms. Cole, he said, whatever he's told you, don't, she said. Her voice was calm. She had been waiting for him to speak to her, and she had decided what she was going to say, and she said it. Don't talk to me like I'm someone you can manage. You're 3 years too late for that. Lucan looked back at Raphael. Something changed in his posture then. The performance of confidence went out of it, the way air goes out of something punctured. Not all at once, but with the specific audible sense of a structure losing what was holding it up. What do you want? He said. A full accounting, Raphael said. Every external contact. Crosses clients, everyone who's been feeding your position and waiting for you to move, every transfer you've staged in the last 30 days. He paused. And the account. You walk out of this building without touching it. Lucan looked at the table, at his own hands. And if I do that? You're out, completely. Everything you've built inside my operation, you leave it. You take what you came in with 12 years ago and nothing that accumulated after. Raphael's voice was entirely level. That's the offer. You have about 90 seconds to decide if you want it, because in 90 seconds, I'm walking into Hargrove's office and freezing that account regardless, and after that, the offer changes significantly. Lucan was quiet. Marin watched his face. She had stood in front of Dorian Slade in a lounge in front of her colleagues and said the true thing out loud and felt her hands go cold and her pulse go loud. That had been its own kind of moment. This was a different kind. This was sitting in a room while a man calculated whether to surrender what he had spent 3 years positioning to take. 30 seconds. Lucan said, I want that in writing before I say anything. You'll get it? 40 more seconds in which nobody moved. Then Lucan picked up his phone and set it on the glass table between them. He looked at Raphael. I'll need to make one call. No, Raphael said. Lucan's eyes went flat. Something shifted behind them. Something that was not surrender and had never been surrender. Something that had been waiting underneath the negotiation for exactly this moment. His hand moved, not toward the phone, toward his jacket. Decker moved faster than Marin's eyes could fully track. Across the room, hand on Lucan's wrist, the specific controlled force of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of intervention. Lucan was half out of his seat, and then wasn't. Decker had him by the arm with one hand and with the other had removed from Lucan's inside jacket pocket a phone, a second phone, a prepaid, and set it on the table. The room was very still. Lucan was breathing hard. His jaw was tight. For the first time in the whole of this conversation, he looked like a man who was afraid, not of Raphael, but of what came next, of the particular future that had just locked closed around him. Raphael stood. He looked down at Lucan Brandt, and in his face was something Marin had not seen there before. Not triumph, not anger, not the satisfaction of a man who has won a contest. Just the cold, exhausted weight of someone who has spent 11 years trusting a person and spent 8 days learning what that trust had cost. Cass, Raphael said. Get Hargrove. He turned and walked to the window. He looked out at Michigan Avenue, the gray November sky, the city going about its incomprehensible business 40 feet below. Marin stood. She moved beside him, not touching, just standing in the same place. It's not done, she said quietly. No, he said. Cross's clients, they'll move when they hear this collapsed. His voice was low. They'll need a new position, and they'll need it fast. That's when people make mistakes. She looked at his profile, the lines around his eyes, the specific quality of a man standing at a window trying to decide what he is now that the immediate crisis has resolved into the next one. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number. Different prefix this time. The message read, We have a problem. Meet me. You know where. She stared at it. She did not know the number. She did not recognize the prefix. She had never given her number to anyone connected to this situation except Raphael, and the message was not from Raphael, who was standing 12 inches to her left. She showed him the screen. He read it. His face did not change expression, but his hand, she saw it. His hand closed very slowly into a fist at his side. That number, he said quietly. That's not Lucan's network. Then whose? He turned away from the window. He looked at Decker across the room. Something passed between them in the look. Some piece of information she didn't have yet. And she watched Raphael's face in the moment he received it. Watched the thing that moved through his expression, brief and total, like a door blown open by wind and shut again immediately. Someone's been inside this from the beginning, he said. Not Lucan. Separate. Deeper. He looked at her phone. And they just told you they know where you go when things get bad. The rooftop. The word landed in her chest before she said it. They know where you go. Outside the window, Chicago was gray and enormous and entirely indifferent. And somewhere in the structure of the building behind her, Lucan Brandt was sitting on a sofa with Cass beside him and a prepaid phone on the glass table. And somewhere below on the street, Harlan Cross's clients were recalibrating. And somewhere, in a network she hadn't mapped yet, in a position she hadn't accounted for, someone else had been watching the whole time and had just decided to stop watching and start moving, and they had pointed that decision directly at the one place where Marin Cole had ever, in 2 years, allowed herself to feel something other than the cost of surviving. Raphael made 3 calls in 4 minutes. The first was to a number Maureen didn't recognize, short and clipped, nothing but an address and a time. The second was to Decker, who was still across the room watching Lucan with the focused patience of a man who had learned that the most dangerous moment was the one right after you thought it was over. The third call Raphael made, he stepped away for, moving to the far corner of the window with his back half turned, and she could hear the tone of it without the words. Low, deliberate, the register of someone giving instructions they needed followed exactly. He came back. He looked at her phone, still in her hand, the message still on the screen. The rooftop, she said. Yes. Someone's been watching it longer than Lucan. Yes. He took her phone, looked at the number, looked at it long enough that she understood he recognized something about it, even if he hadn't said so yet. There was a man, 2 years before Lucan's ambitions became what they became. His name is Warren Silk. He was a financial architect, the person who built the structural framework that my operation runs on. Not the visible parts, the bones. You trusted him. I paid him extraordinarily well, and I trusted him with the kind of information that, if used against me, would cause significant damage. He set her phone on the windowsill. He disappeared 3 years ago. I believed he'd retired. I allowed myself to believe that because the alternative required a level of paranoia I had decided I was done with. He didn't retire. He went to work building something else, using everything I'd taught him about how I operate. His jaw was tight. Lucan thought he was the architect of this. He wasn't. He was the instrument. She looked at him. Silk has been running Lucan. Silk has been running everything. Cross's clients, the shell structures, the ghost credential on the security system. Lucan provided access. Silk provided the blueprint. He picked up her phone and held it out to her. And now Silk wants a meeting, which means He believes that with Lucan neutralized, he can negotiate directly. Or he's moving to clean up. Raphael held her gaze. Yes. She took the phone. She looked at the message. You know where. He knows I've been on the rooftop. He knows everything Lucan's surveillance captured, which means he knows the rooftop is where you feel... He stopped, started again. It's where you let your guard down. So he wants me there because he thinks it gives him an advantage. He wants you there because you're still the most direct pressure point available to him, and he knows it worked on Lucan, and he believes it will work on me. Raphael's voice was controlled, but something in it had a quality she recognized now. The tight, deliberate calm of a man regulating something that wanted very much to not be regulated. She thought about it for 10 seconds. Clean and practical, the way she'd learned to think in the operations years, when events had 17 moving parts, and the one thing you couldn't do was let the scale of it prevent you from identifying the single point of leverage. Then we use it, she said. He looked at her. He wants me on that rooftop, she said. Fine. I go. And you come in a way he doesn't expect. I'm not using you as... You're not using me as anything. I'm making a choice. She held his gaze. I've been making choices since the first night I sat down in that chair instead of going home. This is just another one. A long moment. His eyes moved over her face with the particular attention of a man trying to read something he's not sure he has permission to read. Decker comes with me, he said. Not visible. In position before you arrive. How long do you need? 40 minutes. She looked at her watch. Then I go in an hour. She rode up alone in the main elevator at 1:15 p.m. Decker had gone ahead through the service route. Raphael had gone through the private elevator 17 minutes earlier with Cass positioned in the stairwell on 39. The arrangement had been made in the stripped conference room in 12 minutes flat. The way you make arrangements when time is the constraint and clarity is the only luxury you can afford. She had her keyring. She had her coat. She had nothing else. The elevator doors opened onto the 40th floor corridor. She walked it the way she had walked it hundreds of times. The amber baseboard lights, the carpet, the particular quality of silence that a building has at this hour when the working day is in its midpoint and nobody has reason to be up here. She pushed through the rooftop door. Cold hit her. Midday November, cold, grayer than October, the lake visible in the distance as a flat pewter sheet under a sky that looked like it hadn't decided yet what it wanted to do. A man was standing at the north railing. He was older than she'd expected. Mid-60s, lean, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and had settled into something harder and more angular over time. He was in a wool overcoat, no hat, hands in his pockets, looking out at the lake with what might have been genuine appreciation if she hadn't known what she was walking toward. He heard her and turned. Warren Silk had the eyes of a man who had spent decades in rooms where people were pretending to be something other than what they were. Clear, steady, unrevealing. He looked at her the way a surveyor looks at a plot of land, appraising, technical, not unkind, but entirely without warmth. Marin Cole, he said. Mr. Silk. Something moved in his face, minor surprise, quickly absorbed. Raphael told you. Yes. Then you know more than Lucan ever did. He said it with a kind of dry appreciation. Lucan always believed he was the smartest person in whatever room he occupied. It made him useful, and it made him manageable. She stopped 10 feet from him. And me. You're different. He studied her without embarrassment. You don't believe you're the smartest person in the room. You just act like the facts matter more than who's delivering them. That's rarer. He tilted his head slightly. It's also why you're standing on this rooftop right now instead of on a bus to Milwaukee. I could still be on the bus. No, he said. You couldn't. The debt's been with you for 2 years. The guardianship. The children in Wisconsin. You don't leave things unresolved. It's a quality. He paused. It's also a liability. People keep calling me that. He almost smiled. I imagine they do. She kept her hands loose at her sides. Her pulse was elevated but steady, the kind of elevation that comes from controlled adrenaline rather than fear, and she had learned the difference a long time ago. What do you want? I want to have a reasonable conversation, he said. Lucan overreached. He let personal ambition outpace strategic discipline, and it collapsed the operation faster than I planned for. That's a loss, but it's a recoverable one. He moved away from the railing, not toward her, to the side, to one of the dining chairs. He pulled it out and sat in it with the ease of a man who owned whatever room he was in. Raphael has documentation. I have documentation. We're at a position where mutually assured exposure is the most likely outcome of direct conflict. He crossed one leg over the other. I'd prefer to avoid that. So you want to negotiate? I want to present Raphael with a realistic picture of his options. Through me. You have his ear in a way that nobody else currently does. He said it plainly. That's not manipulation, that's just the situation. She looked at him. She thought about what Raphael had said. He believes it will work on me. She thought about the specific calibration required to sit in a chair on a rooftop in the middle of the afternoon with that kind of ease when you were the person who had engineered the last 3 years of damage. The children, she said, Lily and Cale, my brother's children. Silk paused. What about them? The guardianship failed because of the debt. The debt came from the Cole Mercer collapse. You built that collapse into the structure of Lucan's capital acquisition. She kept her voice even. They're in a state placement in Wisconsin. They've been there 2 years. Lily is 7 now. Cale is 5. Something moved in Silk's face. The first genuine thing she'd seen in it. Not guilt. Men like this didn't carry guilt the way other people did. She understood that. But something. A recognition, maybe, of the specific human accounting that trails behind financial instruments when you follow them far enough. That wasn't targeted at them, he said. I know, which is the part I can't decide how to feel about. She looked at him steadily. You destroyed 4 people's lives as a side effect, as collateral arithmetic. He was quiet. I'm not asking you to feel bad about it, she said. I'm asking you to account for it, as part of whatever negotiation you think you're having today. Silk looked at her for a long moment. His composed face was doing something more complicated than composure now. You're not here to carry a message to Raphael, he said slowly. No. You're here to make sure this conversation includes things that would otherwise be treated as externalities. Yes. He exhaled through his nose, looked at the lake, looked back. The children's situation, the debt, those are resolvable. Financially and legally, with the right instruments, they're straightforward to address. He said it the way he'd say anything, as a calculation, but he said it. If there's a negotiated resolution here, those things can be part of it. That's not a negotiation point, she said. That's a condition. Ms. Cole, a condition, she said again, with a quietness that had iron through it. Not a point, not a concession. A condition of the conversation continuing. Silk looked at her. Behind him, the rooftop door opened. Raphael came through first, Decker behind him, and Cass, and they positioned without being told to position, the geometry of it clean and practiced. Raphael walked to the center of the terrace and stopped. He looked at Silk in the chair with the expression of a man meeting something he had thought was behind him. Silk looked up at him. Something passed between them. Not the coded look of former partners, not warmth, not even the straightforward contempt of enemies. Something older than any of that. The look of 2 people who had built something together once and were now standing in the ruin of what that had become. Warren, Raphael said. Raphael. Silk stood. He did not look surprised. He had expected this. Marin understood, expected it, and come anyway, which was its own statement about what kind of man he was. It's impressive. Yes? I told her the children's situation was resolvable. I heard. Raphael had been in the stairwell long enough. He had heard the last 4 minutes at least. His face was not showing what that had cost him to hear. Silk put his hands in his pockets. He looked at Raphael the way a chess player looks at a board when the game has moved past the point where either player is happy with how it developed. I have exposure, he said. You have exposure. We both know what a protracted legal fight looks like and who benefits from it. Lawyers, Raphael said. Lawyers, and the people who are waiting to pick through whatever's left. He tilted his head slightly. I'm not Lucan. I didn't come here to take anything from you. I came to build something parallel. You were supposed to be too occupied with grief to notice for another 18 months. And then? And then we would have had a different conversation, as equals with separate operations. He said it without apology. It was simply the plan, stated plainly. Lucan accelerated everything with his personal obsessions. The woman, the rooftop surveillance. He turned a business strategy into something personal, and it collapsed the timeline. And your solution is to negotiate from the wreckage. My solution is to recognize when a position has become untenable and find the most rational exit. He looked at Raphael steadily. You don't want a war. You haven't wanted one in years. I know you. You want to build something that doesn't require you to spend the rest of your life looking at the door. The wind moved across the terrace. Somewhere below them, Chicago was doing its afternoon thing, indifferent and enormous, the lake flat and pewter at the horizon. Raphael was quiet for a long time. The external contacts, he said. Cross. The clients he represents, all of them. I'll provide a full accounting. And you walk away from everything inside my structure. Every channel, every contact, every arrangement you built using my framework. Agreed. And the children, Raphael said. Everything connected to the Cole-Mercer debt. You resolve it, completely. Not in 6 months. In 30 days. Silk looked at Marin, then back at Raphael. That's a specific timeline. It's the timeline, Raphael said. A pause. Silk looked at the floor for a moment, then up. All right, he said. What followed was not dramatic. That was what Marin remembered afterward most clearly, the absence of drama in the moment she had expected it. Decker produced documents. Silk reviewed them with the speed of a man who had spent his career reading instruments of financial agreement. He made 2 modifications in precise handwriting in the margins. Raphael reviewed the modifications and accepted one and crossed out the other. They agreed on the crossed-out one after 40 seconds of very quiet back and forth. Cass photographed every page with his phone. Silk signed. He put the pen down on the low sectional and looked at Raphael one more time. For whatever it's worth, he said, I didn't know about the accident, your son. I found out afterward. He said it without softening it, just as information. It wasn't something I would have... He stopped. He seemed to recognize that finishing the sentence would be a claim he couldn't support. I'm sorry for it, he said instead. Raphael said nothing for a moment. Then, leave the building. Silk left. The door closed behind him. Marin stood with her hands in her coat pockets and listened to the city. The wind was lighter now, or maybe she was just less aware of the cold. Decker and Cass were on their phones. There was the logistical machinery of what came next. The external contacts to be notified, the accounts to be moved, the legal structure of the agreement to be formalized through people who handled such things. She was looking at the south railing, the low sectional beside it, the chair she had fallen asleep in 7 weeks ago. She heard Raphael's footsteps on the terrace tile. He stopped beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while. The 30 days, she said, for the children. I'll have someone start on it this afternoon. I need to be part of it, the process. I'm not handing it to someone else and waiting. I know. He said it without hesitation. I'll have whoever handles it report to you directly. She nodded. She kept looking at the railing. Lily likes drawing, she said. She used to cover everything, walls, notebooks, the backs of receipts. Cale was starting to talk when... She stopped. He'll be almost 6 now. He won't remember my voice. Raphael was very still beside her. I'm not telling you that so you feel responsible, she said. I'm telling you because I've been not telling anyone for 2 years, and I'm tired of carrying it without it having a shape. I understand, he said quietly. Do you? He was quiet for a moment, then, Eli used to fall asleep in the car, he said. Every time. Didn't matter how short the drive, 5 minutes and he was out. I used to take the long way home sometimes, just to have more time before I had to wake him up. His voice was steady, but it was steady the way a surface is steady when something is moving underneath it. I haven't told anyone that. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the lake, the same way he always looked at the lake, like it was the one thing in his field of view that didn't need anything from him. The long way home, she said. Yes. She looked back at the railing, the city below it. We're both very bad at putting things down. Yes. That's either something we have in common or something that's going to cause problems. He looked at her. Something in his face had loosened, not collapsed, not exposed in a way that was careless, but loosened, the way a fist loosens when the thing it was braced against is finally, actually, gone. Possibly both, he said. She almost smiled. The almost of it felt like something she'd been working toward for a long time. The days that followed were not easy. She had not expected them to be. Silk's accounting of his external network took 11 days to fully surface. 3 of Cross's clients attempted to reposition through a separate broker before Raphael's legal team closed the channel. There was a 22-hour period on day 6 where it looked like one of the shell company transfers had moved before the agreement was executed, and Marin sat in a conference room on the 38th floor for 4 hours going through transaction timestamps with a forensic accountant until they found the discrepancy. A clerical entry, not a transfer, the dates misread, and the relief that moved through her when they confirmed it had the specific cellular quality of a body releasing something it had been clenching for days. She kept her shifts. All of them. Garrett looked at her with the expression of a man who had been peripherally aware that something large had occurred in the building's upper management and was deeply committed to not knowing any details, and she helped him maintain that commitment by simply showing up and doing her job and saying nothing. On day 14, a letter arrived from a family court office in Wisconsin. She opened it at her kitchen table at 7 in the morning with her coffee going cold beside her. The letter informed her that a petition for guardianship reconsideration had been filed on her behalf by a legal firm in Chicago. The petition cited resolution of the financial impediment that had previously been the basis for denial. There would be a preliminary hearing in 6 weeks. She read it 3 times. Then she set it down and pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed. She did not cry. She had told herself she wouldn't, not because crying was weakness, but because she had learned that her tears were a finite and specific resource, and she needed to save them for the moments when she was actually in the same room as the people who had earned them. She picked up her phone and texted Raphael. The petition was filed, 6 weeks to hearing. His response came in 2 minutes. I know. Harmon filed yesterday. He's the best family court attorney in the state. A pause. Then, how are you? She looked at the letter on her table, at the crack in the plaster above the sink, at the morning light coming through the window over the alley, the specific quality of November light in Chicago, gray and thin and somehow still present. She typed, I think I might actually be okay. She put the phone down and finished her coffee and went to work. On a night in late November, 22 days after Warren Silk signed his name in the margins of a document on a rooftop, Marin came up to the 40th floor and found the terrace lit. Not the overhead lights. They were off. But someone had set votives along the railing, small ones, the kind left over from events, flickering in the cold with the specific determination of small flames that know they'll go out soon and burn anyway. The low sectional had a blanket on it that hadn't been there before. On the low table was a thermos and 2 cups. Raphael was at the north railing. He turned when she came through the door. She looked at the candles, at the cups, at him. You're not subtle, she said. I'm not trying to be. She crossed the terrace. She sat on the low sectional and pulled the blanket over her lap, because it was November in Chicago, and the blanket was there and she was tired and she had been cold for a long time. He poured something from the thermos. Coffee, she discovered, was something added that was warm going down in a way that coffee alone wasn't, and handed her a cup and sat in the chair opposite. She drank. He drank. The candles threw a restless light across the terrace tile. Lucan, she said, where does that land? He's cooperating with the full accounting in exchange for the terms we agreed on. He'll be out of Chicago within the month. Raphael turned his cup in his hands. The empire he thought he was building doesn't exist. He built something inside something else. Without my infrastructure, it's nothing. Does he know that? He does now. She thought about Lucan in that banking corridor, the way the performance had gone out of his posture. He spent 3 years believing he was the smartest person in every room. He was very good, Raphael said. That was the problem. He was good enough that I let him operate without enough oversight, and he understood my structure better than I realized. You trusted him. I trusted the version of him I decided to see. He said it without deflection, just as fact. I have a history of doing that, deciding what I want to see and then seeing it. She looked at him. Eli, she said. He was quiet. After he died, she said carefully, did you stop seeing things clearly, or did you stop wanting to? A long pause. The candles moved in a small gust of wind. I stopped caring about the difference, he said, which is its own answer. She nodded. She understood that one. The specific anesthesia of grief, not the sharp pain, which was almost manageable because it had a location, but the dull occlusion that came after, the way it narrowed your peripheral vision until you were only able to see what was directly in front of you, and even that you saw through a gauze of not particularly caring. The rooftop, she said. Why did you start coming up here? He looked at the railing, at the city beyond it. Eli and I came up here once. He was 3. There was an event I was supposed to attend, and I brought him instead because his mother was traveling, and I didn't want to leave him with someone else for the evening. He paused. He was terrified of the elevator, screamed the whole ride up, and then when the doors opened and he saw the city, he stopped. When he continued, his voice was level in the deliberate way. He stopped crying immediately, just went completely quiet, walked to the railing and grabbed it with both hands and looked out. He paused again. He stood there for 20 minutes, wouldn't come away from it. She held her cup in both hands and listened. After he was gone, I came up here because it was the only place I could feel the specific quality of what he felt that night, Raphael said. The silence of a child encountering something too large to talk about. He looked at her. And then I came up one night, and there was a woman asleep in the chair by the south railing with a key ring in her hand, and I sat down and watched the city, and for the first time in 3 years, it didn't feel like I was doing it alone. The wind moved between them. A candle guttered and steadied. She set her cup down on the table. She looked at her hands, at the key ring in her coat pocket, the shape of it visible through the fabric. 14 keys, most of them still useful. I fell asleep because I was exhausted, she said. That's the honest version. I know. And I kept coming back because... She stopped. She started again. Because I had spent 2 years being very careful not to need anything that could be taken away. And then I sat down in that chair and you let me sleep. And in the morning I got on the bus and I realized the whole ride home that I had been, for about 4 hours, a person who wasn't counting the cost of everything. She paused. That's a difficult thing to give up once you've had it. He was looking at her with the full, unhurried attention he brought to everything he chose to pay attention to. I don't know what this is, she said. I want to be honest about that. I know what it isn't. It isn't simple, and it isn't without cost, and there are parts of what you've been and what you've built that I haven't finished deciding what I think about. She looked at him directly. But I know I don't want to go back to the way things were before that night, whatever that means. It means we figure it out, he said, without a blueprint. Honestly. You're not good at honest. No, he said. I'm learning. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her chest did the thing it had been doing since the first night she sat across from him on this rooftop. That quiet, dangerous, insufficient, but real thing that she had spent 7 weeks trying to decide whether to trust. She picked up her cup. She looked out at the city. It was still there, enormous and indifferent, and lit up orange all the way to the edge of the dark. The same city it had always been, not caring in the least about what happened in the buildings above it, or the people inside them, or the very specific and improbable series of events that had led a lounge waitress and a feared man to sit across from each other on a rooftop on a cold November night with terrible coffee and candles that kept nearly going out. She was warm under the blanket. Her feet still hurt from the shift. She stayed. They didn't talk much after that. What was left between them didn't need talking. It needed the quiet of 2 people who had been very loud inside their own heads for a very long time, choosing, for once, to sit with something without demanding it explain itself. The candles burned down one by one. The city went on being a city. The lake was out there somewhere in the dark, enormous and cold and indifferent, not caring in the least that two people on a rooftop had found something in the vicinity of solid ground after long years of looking for it in places that could not hold weight. She thought about Lily, who liked drawing, about Kyle, who would be almost 6 now and would not remember her voice, but would learn it again, the way children learn things, without ceremony, without making anything of it, just absorbing it because it was present and consistent and reliable. She planned to be all 3. The last candle went out sometime around 3. Neither of them moved to relight it.